So picture this. It's March of 2026, and America's airports don't just bend, they completely break. What kicked off as a political squabble in Washington, D.C. just spiraled into this full-blown national crisis. I mean, it brought air travel to a screeching halt and pushed the whole system to its absolute limit. So how did it all go so wrong so fast? Well, to really get it, we have to start with just one single staggering number.
4.5 hours. That's not a typo. At its absolute peak, that was the security wait time at Hartsfield-Jackson in Atlanta. You know, only the world's busiest airport. That's not a line, that's practically an endurance sport. And believe me, this one number was just a tiny symptom of a much, much bigger meltdown that was happening nationwide.
And yeah, this was not just an Atlanta problem. Not at all. Airports all over the country were in a state of meltdown. I mean, look at this. New Orleans, Houston, Austin, passengers were being told to show up 4, even 5 hours early. And even then, there was no guarantee you'd actually make your flight. The whole system was just utter chaos. So the crucial question is, how did we even get here? How did this massive piece of infrastructure, something millions of people rely on every single day, just fall apart? The answer, it turns out, didn't start in an airport terminal. It started with a political standoff. To really understand the airport chaos, we've got to rewind a few weeks before all those insane lines started forming. See, the root of this whole problem wasn't in an airport at all. It was a political flashpoint in Washington. Everything really traces back to January 2026 in Minneapolis. After 2 fatal shootings by federal agents, a political firestorm just erupted. This led lawmakers to demand some major reforms within Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. By early February, those lawmakers formally tied the reforms to the funding bill for the Department of Homeland Security. Well, when that February 14th deadline passed with no agreement, the money for critical agencies like the TSA was just shut off. And here's what they were fighting over. On one side, lawmakers wanted specific changes: judicial warrants, no more masks for agents, and mandatory body cameras. On the other side, the administration just flat out refused to include these reforms in the funding bill. The result? A total stalemate. And so the Department of Homeland Security, and the TSA along with it, went into a partial shutdown. Now, this political fight, it had a very real and very immediate human cost. The shutdown put the absolute front line of our aviation security, the TSA, on the brink of a total collapse. Just try to wrap your head around this. About 50,000 TSA officers were labeled essential. That means they had to show up to their jobs to keep the airports safe. The catch? They weren't getting paid. For more than 5 weeks, they were expected to do this high-stress, critical security job for free. And the impact was just devastating. As Atlanta's TSA union leader Aaron Barker put it, officers literally couldn't afford medical care for their own families. This wasn't just some inconvenience. This was a real crisis hitting tens of thousands of American homes.
So what happens when people can't afford gas to get to the job that isn't paying their bills? Well, they stop coming. By March 22nd, the call-out rates were just staggering. Over 42% of the TSA workforce in New Orleans just didn't show up. Over 41% in Atlanta. You simply cannot run an airport when nearly half of your security staff is missing.
And it wasn't just the daily call-outs. The agency was bleeding talent. During this shutdown, 376 trained TSA officers just resigned. They quit for good. That's a huge loss of experience and people that you just can't get back overnight. The workforce was literally unraveling. Okay, so with airports in total chaos and the public getting furious, the administration rolled out a plan, a response that was completely unheard of in American aviation history. The plan was to deploy ICE agents, yup, the very same agency at the center of the whole political fight, to the nation's airports to try and manage the crisis. Now, the job they gave these agents was really specific. Officially, they weren't supposed to be screening bags or anything like that. Instead, their job was crowd control, guarding exits, and checking IDs, all with the idea of freeing up the few TSA officers who were still there to do the actual security screening. And the political game here was made crystal clear by Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy. The goal was to make the long lines less painful for the public, which would take away the political leverage the other side had in the funding fight, all without actually giving in on their policy demands. But here's the thing. Sending one law enforcement agency to do the job of another didn't fix the problem. Actually, it just showed how incredibly strained the entire aviation system had become, with consequences that went way beyond just long lines. The backlash was immediate, and it came from all over. Security experts, politicians like Senator Lisa Murkowski, they all pointed out the obvious. ICE agents are not trained for aviation security, and putting them there could just make things even more tense in those already chaotic airports.
And then, the system's strain led to a real tragedy. On March 22nd, at New York's LaGuardia Airport, an Air Canada jet actually collided with a fire truck while landing. 2 pilots were killed. This was just a fundamental breakdown of safety and communication in a system with absolutely no room for error.
The very next day, at nearby Newark Airport, the air traffic control tower had to be evacuated because of a strange smell, stopping all flights. You see, these weren't just random, isolated incidents. They were signs of a national infrastructure failing under immense pressure, with people exhausted and routine maintenance pushed aside. And the economic damage was just massive. The whole crisis was on track to cost the US economy nearly $1 billion. And all of this was happening during a record-breaking spring travel season. Airline CEOs even wrote an open letter calling the situation un-American, and they warned that the whole world was starting to lose confidence in America's airspace system. The crisis of March 2026 really forced a hard look at the stability of the whole system. It raised these huge, long-term questions about how to stop a political fight from ever grounding America again. Right in the middle of all the chaos, lawmakers started trying to find solutions. Bills like the Keep America Flying Act were put forward with a really simple goal: create automatic funding for essential aviation workers so their paychecks could never be held hostage in a political fight again. And, this quote from the US Travel Association, it might just sum up the whole crisis best. The core failure here was a willingness to gamble with public safety, all while relying on an essential workforce that was, quite literally, running on empty. And this all brings us to the final, unavoidable question. The 2026 airport crisis wasn't really about long lines or funding fights. It was about what happens when critical infrastructure and the human beings who run it are treated like leverage. It forces all of us to ask, should our national security ever be used as a political pawn?